Earlier this year, I got a job. The wife of the MI Group's chairman hired me to seduce her husband. I'm what they call a mistress dispeller. When a wife finds out her husband has a mistress she can't get rid of, she hires me. I become the fourth party, the woman who pulls him away from the mistress. Once he takes the bait, I ghost. Most men, after realizing they've been played, snap out of it and return to their families. For the ones who still want a divorce, I collect the evidence of infidelity that lets the wife walk away with everything she's owed, so the side chick doesn't get to cash in on a marriage she helped destroy. This time, the client was MI Group, the biggest publicly traded company in New York. Its chairman, Elias Blackwood, built his empire on his wife Serafina Whitaker's connections. Marriages like theirs follow a pattern. The husband marries up, climbs the ladder, and once he's at the top, then bites the hand that fed him. By the time she wants what's hers back, she's already outmatched. Men like that are calculating and ruthless. Go after him wrong, and you're the one who ends up buried, no payday, just trouble. But Serafina's offer was too good to pass up. I decided to take the risk. About Elias, she told me only two things. 1, he has almost no interest in women. 2, seducing him will take a lot of money and a lot of luck. Serafina said straight out, she didn't just want a divorce. She wanted half his net worth. I frowned. Half of what the MI chairman was worth had to be in the billions. No wife had ever walked out of a divorce with that much.
Lofi, I've heard what you can do. Push him harder. Get him to make a mistake he can't walk back from. The worse the leverage, the better my odds. Our marriage has been dead for years. He's just been freezing me out. He's taken everything, and now he's planning to dump me with nothing. I'm cornered. I must protect myself. And you don't have to worry about exposure. I'm not making this public. I'll settle with him privately. What if the settlement falls through? Then we go to court, and before the trial, I'll fly you out of the country until it's over. What if your husband comes after me? Lofi, the safest thing is not to take the job at all. If you're brave enough to take it, surely you can handle the risk. 3 months. I'll have what you need by then.
Serafina stirred her coffee and warned me Elias wouldn't go down that easy. She thought I should play it slow, a careful build over 2 years. 2 years, I'd taken down 5 men in that kind of window. In my experience, there wasn't a target I couldn't crack in 3 months. I walked out with my head up. Serafina was still smiling, that elegant smile of hers. I went through the file Serafina had given me and reached out to Elias. She'd built me a new identity. Ivy League graduate, never been in a serious relationship, spotless background. High-status men are paranoid. They weigh every risk. They want a girl who's clean, no past, no future complications. When the call connected, I heard his voice for the first time. Low, polished.
No, 432 Park Avenue. Come now.
The sky was burning like fire at sunset, spreading from crowded streets all the way up to the empty glass towers, like it would never end. I drove over the overpass, pulled up in front of a convenience store, and rolled down the window. My eyes locked on the MI Group building. There he was, bathed in the orange light, a cold silhouette. He was turning something small over in his fingers. A metal lid flipped open and shut, catching the light in silver flashes. When I cut the engine, I saw it clearly, a lighter. Elias was even more striking in person than in his photos. A light gray turtleneck rose just high enough to cover his Elias's apple, understated, but somehow sexier for being hidden. His gray wool coat hung open, revealing sharp black trousers underneath. Every detail of him radiated a kind of polished, dangerous maturity. But it was the eyes that stopped me, dark, unreadable, a little haunted. I realized then I might be in over my head. A man like Elias with that face, that money, that power had women throwing themselves at him constantly. He'd be immune to the usual tricks. I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, crossed the street, and stopped right in front of him. I leaned into the look. A fresh college grad, wide-eyed, new to the city, gave me a flat, expressionless glance and started up the steps. A breeze carried the scent of alcohol off him. He'd just come from a business dinner. I followed him into the elevator. He turned his back to me and pressed the button for the 11th floor.
How did my wife find you?
My professor at college is a friend of hers. He introduced us.
I watched his reflection in the polished elevator doors. He was watching them too. Our eyes met, and the pressure that came off him was suffocating. In the reflection, I saw myself. Crisp academic blouse, a soft pleated skirt, makeup so subtle, it looked like I wasn't wearing any. This was instinct. A top hunter knows her bait. For a man who lives by self-discipline, who's always one step from the edge, you don't lure him with red lipstick and cleavage. You lure him with innocence. Something that looks harmless, but has a hook in it. I'd put just a touch of gloss on my lips, a soft pink, the color of a berry ripe enough to pick.
Tomorrow, change the lipstick.
His sharp click in the closed space scraped against my nerves. That was the signal. A warning sign, but also a tell. He'd noticed. I could feel something almost like sport in the way his fingers moved. He was already engaged. He just didn't know it yet. That fall had started. The elevator doors opened. I'd already done the math, shifted my weight at exactly the right angle, so my chest brushed his arm through the jacket. My resume and portfolio scattered across the floor. I bent down to gather them, and from his vantage point, the parted collar of my blouse offered a view designed to derail a man's reason.
Didn't my wife warn you? I don't keep smart-ass assistants.
My first few days on the job felt like trying to scale an iceberg with no cracks in it. Elias was tougher than I'd expected. The wall he kept between himself and other people wasn't enacted, it was bone deep. I knew the worst thing I could do was push too fast. A man like this would toss me out like garbage the second he sensed desperation. So I pulled back and started with his secretary instead. When I pushed open his heavy office door for what I felt like the 100th time that day, Elias didn't even look up. The air carried a faint trace of cedar, cool, clean, exactly like him. Finally, he lifted his gaze, brow furrowing slightly, making it clear I was an interruption. I met those bottomless eyes without flinching, even as I tracked the rhythm of my own breathing. I told him his secretary was busy, so she'd asked me to bring the documents up. He gestured for me to put them down and leave, but I didn't rush out. When prey is on alert, the hunter makes a little noise, just enough to pull his attention.
I don't want to call you Mr. Blackwood like everyone else. May I call you Mr. Elias?
My gaze drifted casually to the row of beautifully bound books behind him. Then I dropped my first piece of Bait Western Literature's Unbridled Carnal Impulses. I wanted to see if there was anything beneath that frozen statue, lay a hidden craving for loss of control. Instead, he just loosened his tie, every movement precise, almost surgical, and said, "Restraint is the highest form of power." In that moment, I realized playing the soulmate was pointless against a master-level man like him. Rational conversation only reinforced his armor. I needed to take his rationality off the table entirely, let instinct do the thinking for him. I took a deep breath and made my killer move. I leaned slightly forward like I was checking the calendar on his desk, a loose button on my blouse catching on the metal edge of the calendar stand. Reap a soft tearing sound. 2 buttons popped, one after another, loud in the quiet room. One of them rolled across the desk with a clean little tap, 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 and came to rest right next to the hand holding his pen. I froze, met his eyes with the right amount of innocence, the right flicker of embarrassment, and in that breath of silence, I caught it, the smallest shift in the rhythm of his breathing.
Mr. Elias, as your personal assistant, I need to know all your preferences. Could you walk me through it? I hope that in the future, my everything will satisfy you completely, just like the way your right hand knows your left. So familiar it doesn't have to ask.
I had calculated the exposure with precision. 1 inch more would have been cheap vulgarity. Only this subtle, teasing glimpse was the deadliest hook a top-tier hunter could cast. Yet, not a single ripple crossed his face. In those deep eyes, there was no greed, only a bottomless quiet. He opened the acquisition file on his desk and told me, flatly, to leave. I've reeled in plenty of powerful men in my career. This was the first time the fish had flicked its tail and soaked me with ice water. I swallowed the sting, straightened up, smoothed the modest pleats of my skirt, and turned to go. Then, behind me,
Laffy.
his voice, low, textured. My pupils tightened. A small, smug curl moved through me. Men are men. Nobody refuses bait this close to the mouth. I turned with the right, wide-eyed look in place.
How old are you?
26.
A very beautiful age.
Then he disappeared back into the stack of documents and didn't say another word. For the next 36 hours, I didn't even cross his sightline. He flew out on business with his team, only the secretary went along. Being cut out like that made me question my read for the first time. I thought I was about to land a foothold. Turned out, I might just be something he'd already seen through and set aside. It wasn't until the second night that my phone lit up with his text. Royal Winery, come, short, cold. On the drive over, I called Serafina.
Don't celebrate just yet. Elias excels at staying out of the game, while everyone else inside it gets torn apart.
Serafina, the game your husband is so good of, I've perfected it too.
That night, the moment I stepped into the private room, every man turned their gaze toward me.
Mr. Elias.
Can you drink?
In Manhattan's social code, a man asking a woman if she drinks carries the same suggestive weight as inviting her to a late night movie. I lowered my lashes, half hesitant, half tempted, telling him my legs get weak when I've had too much. He didn't even register it. Just told me to stand aside and wait in the same tone you'd use to shoo away a dusty ornament. The other man, though, he finally noticed me. His eyes raked over me with that slow, ugly thoroughness. Elias introduced me offhand. Personal assistant his wife had brought on. The man laughed and said I was exactly his dream girl type. Elias rolled an unlit cigarette between his fingers, brushing along the paper. His tone remarked with amusement, said I was neither smart nor stupid. That assessment lifted the wild thing in my chest just a little. But when the other man asked my name, something blank flickered across Elias's face. I'd been at his side for almost a week. He hadn't bothered to keep my name. Not memory loss, indifference. Anything outside of money and power was an ant to him.
Laufey. Mr. Elias, I'm Laufey.
The wine party ended late at night. On the drive back, the cool smell of tobacco filled every inch of the car. I sat in the front seat and watched him in the rearview mirror. Something about him that night was unusually loose, romantic, almost. He'd shed a rigid business suit for a deep wine-colored shirt, so saturated it looked almost feverish. The top buttons were undone, hairless. His collarbones moved in and out of the neon. He held the stub of a cigarette between his lips. His hair was cropped, clean, and sharp. I was halfway through working out how to crack open the closed space between us when Elias, who'd been resting with his eyes shut, opened them. He subbed out the last spark in the ashtray. In the silence, he spoke without warning.
Do I look good?
Sorry?
Do I look good?
Before I could answer, he leaned forward, and in that 1 second, the aggression he'd held back all night, a blend of alcohol, as cedar crashed over me like a wave. Our faces were one breath. Streetlights ghosted across his face, breaking and reforming the sharp lines of him. He was too close. Cedar and aged red wine in a pocket of air that had no exit. The alcohol had pushed a faint, unnatural flush across his usually impossible skin running from his jaw up into the hollows beneath his eyes. I made my voice small, made my eyes do the work.
Mr. Elias, you look very good.
Where do I look good?
You said you don't like the makeup. I won't wear it tomorrow.
Anything I don't like, you won't do?
He was warning me, drawing the line called boundary in red ink and watching to see if I'd step over it.
Anything that's bad for you I won't do. But men are stubborn. The softest thing about you is usually your heart. Sometimes what you say you don't want is just what you wish you did.
Half an hour later, the car pulled up under the cold glass tower of his building. I caught his arm before the driver could. Inside, apartment was sealed in a clean, masculine scent. While I had the chance, I scanned the bathroom. No long hairs on the counter. No second toothbrush. No traces of anyone else. For a man of his power and prime to keep himself this contained, alone, in this city, it was a kind of devastating sexiness. He sank into the sofa, exhausted. Lamp shadow ran along his collarbones, where he'd undone his collar. I cracked open a bottle of water and took a sip first, left a faint print of lip color on the rim. A small, intentional brand.
Mr. Elias, the water tastes sweet. Or is it my mouth that made it sweet?
Does an assistant's job description include feeding me water?
I'm here for everything you need.
I was left stranded in the cold living room, and frustration wrapped around me layer by layer like the damp cold of a Manhattan winter. At 1:30 a.m., the driver's headlights swept across the ceiling once and vanished. I pushed the half-open door of his master bedroom. His signature cool cedar scent filled the air. He was sleeping on his side under the warm light of the wall, scones quiet, distant, as still as deep water that reflects no image. To hook a man at the top of the food chain, pure lust is the cheapest chip. I wanted him psychologically addicted, haunted by a longing that stops just short of satisfaction. Crawling into bed is too crude, but I had to stay the night. Staying over is an unmistakable signal in this game. It means the climax is close. I took the piece of black lace lingerie and tucked it carefully under his sheets. A poisonous lure left behind to catalyze his fall. I slipped out the master suite and settled for the guest room. The next morning, I came back with sandwiches from downstairs. Elias was just walking out in clean sharp loungewear, damp hair still clinging to his forehead. I was about to say good morning and froze. A woman's voice from the bathroom. It's Serafina. My heart stopped. My hand came up to my mouth on instinct. Under Elias's bottomless stare, I stumbled into his bedroom with all the guilt I should have been faking and pulled the door shut tight behind me. I peered through the crack. The man in the living room stood like a sculpture, infuriatingly composed. In that treacherous morning, I crouched by the bed where I'd just stashed the lace under, listening to a husband and wife talk in low voices. The trap had snapped shut, but for the first time, I couldn't tell who was actually cornered, the hunter or the prey. Holding my breath, I watched their every move through the door crack. With practiced coyness, Serafina complained about coffee spilling on her blouse. Elias walked unhurriedly toward the dining area, his tone utterly flat. They moved on to an art exhibition in Moscow. Serafina clumsily floated the idea of him going with her. Elias's answer felt less like a husband replying to a wife and more like a piece moved on a board. When he offered to clear his schedule and fly out with her, I caught it the single beat of dead air in the room. Serafina flinched, smirking inwardly. My hunter instincts told me the abyss between them was deeper and uglier than I imagined.
Laffy, are you satisfied with her?
A thin layer of sweat broke across my palms. This was the crux. If Elias exposed last night's transgression, I'd lose everything. If he covered for me, he became my accomplice.
She's fine. She does her job.
He covered for me. And on a quieter level, that cover was its own admission, hesitation, silent permission. The ascetic's rational shell now bore an irreparable crack. As Serafina left, I witnessed a farce titled Devoted Couple through the crack. She hugged Elias back in the hallway, directly facing the security camera. As a top-tier specialist, I knew the calculation behind that pose. She needed the illusion of an intact marriage to tear off more flesh in their billion-dollar divorce battle. The wife performed. The husband seemed oblivious or simply didn't care.
Coming out yet? You stayed last night. I hope a coincidence like that only happens once.
Mr. Elias, doesn't this almost feel like we're having an affair?
Elias set down the silver spoon, his cold gaze locked onto me.
I had this flash, like Serafina was about to walk in and catch us in the act. I hid on reflex.
Is that so? It can only be a flash. I would never cheat. There isn't a woman worth the risk of a wrong move.
That kind of arrogance is intoxicating. Men always think their logic builds a fortress. Nothing can knock down. They never see that what a hunter loves most is watching a fortress like that come apart, inch by inch, under nothing but want. The Manhattan morning was still soft, with fog. From the back of a cab, I called Serafina. When I told her I'd spent the night at Elias's apartment, the excitement coming through the phone was hot enough to burn me. I watched the last of the neon fade outside the window, something heavy moving in my chest. The conversation with Elias kept replaying that calm, that line about not cheating. I asked Serafina one more time to give me a clean reason for the divorce, because to anyone on the outside, Elias looked like a model citizen. She cut me off, flat and cold. He wasn't anywhere near as clean as he looked. That afternoon, I pushed open the door of his office. Elias wasn't there. Instead, a man in his 50s was standing with his back to me, turning over the Greek statue Elias kept on the credenza like it was something he'd come to appraise. I frowned and told him not to touch it. He didn't even acknowledge me. When he turned around, the light caught the high ridge of his brow, a face with something fox-like under it, smart and slow-moving. He was wearing a hand-tailored vest, the kind that only sits right on men who've spent decades in rooms where money moves. Despite myself, I softened. He pulled a heavy hardcover off the shelf, A History of War, and leaned against the windowsill.
I've always liked Hannibal's indirect approach at Canty. A clever detour beats a straight charge every time, don't you think?
I wouldn't know about any of that, sir.
You wouldn't know? Your personnel file says you graduated top of your class in classical history at Yale. If that's true, you should be able to tell me exactly who used the flanking maneuver to win at Canty.
The degree Serafina had built for me was history, a major nobody in finance ever drills down on. Safe by design.
It looks like Elias doesn't know yet that his new assistant's resume is fake. Laffy. Running a con this brazen, right under Elias's nose? You've got a remarkable amount of nerve. Seb, you didn't tell me you were coming. Passing by? Wanted to meet your new history prodigy in person. Seb takes a double espresso.
I was still drowning in the panic of having my fake degree called out by Seb. My fingers were freezing. I stood there like a marionette with the strings cut. It took Elias repeating himself in a lower, harder tone for me to come back to my body and stumble toward the bar. Sebastian Whitaker, Serafina's uncle. I'd never imagined I'd meet the famous Wall Street vulture under circumstances like these. The sharp little smile in his eyes earlier had shredded my Yale story to ribbons. Behind me, I heard clean tap of chess pieces being set down on a board. I hid behind the bar, palms sweating cold. The grinder's roar covered my breathing. I watched them through the reflection in the frosted glass, two men. One, the disciplined CEO I'd come to bring down. The other, a thread with eyes that didn't miss anything. I carried the 2 cups back into the room. Seb was leaning hard into the board, pressing his advantage in their verbal sparring over the Max acquisition. Elias didn't move. He set one piece down in the quietest corner of the board, and the whole position flipped in his favor. Slowly, he picked up the black coffee I'd brought, fingertip running along the rim of the cup like a man polishing a trophy.
Miss Laffey, in this game, Elias was hit on both flanks. He turned a weakness into an opening and walked it back to a draw most men couldn't pull off. In your textbooks at Yale, what would you call a maneuver like that?
Maybe a Trojan horse?
No. There's a more sophisticated term. It's Hannibal's indirect approach at the Battle of Cannae.
Elias set down his long cold espresso and ran his fingertip across the rim as his cold stare locked on Seb's smug face. Seb picked up his cup, dipped his head to take in the smell, and with that fox-like glitter still in his eyes, pivoted to chatting about last week's game. I exhaled in relief. Seb gently places his coffee cup on the glass coffee table and crosses his legs. He folds his hands, his eyes showing a calculated, predatory aggression.
You know I hate the rat race even more than you do. But when there's money on the table, a vulture like me has to take a bite. Nobody but MI can cover Max's multi-$100 million hole. Except me, I can handle it too.
Sensing resistance, Seb abruptly shifted gears, bringing up Elias and Serafina's separation. I saw Elias's grip on the cup go still for a single beat. They stared at each other like 2 placid abysses, beneath which churned waves capable of swallowing Manhattan whole. Seb was warning him, I had proof your marriage was dead in name only. The moment the door closed, I almost dropped where I stood. Elias sat in a wedge of late sunlight, expression unreadable. Knowing a man's secrets, in Hunter 101, but I decided to go big on this one. Against an impervious ascetic like him, slow burn tactics had failed. I needed to rip the mask off his face myself.
Mr. Elias, is Seb using the separation to push you out of acquisition? You lied to me. Your marriage isn't as perfect as you claim. You just need that spotless reputation. Cure your empire. You keep women at arm's length because you can't afford a stain on the record. I can cover for you. Your mistress, your whatever. I can run interference. After all, I'm yours. I don't mind getting my hands dirty if it makes you happy.
Elias fell silent, then let out an ambiguous chuckle, gesturing toward the drawer. I pulled it open. Lying inside was the button, the one that had popped off my blouse the day I'd staged the scene at his desk. He hadn't thrown it away. In this high-stakes gamble of power and desire, as long as he didn't despise me, his fall was inevitable.
Don't you still owe me something? My lace ingenue. I left it in a hurry and forgot it under your master bedroom sheets. Did you find it?
Come pick it up when you have a minute.
Friday evening, Elias had a social to attend and was knotting his tie in front of the office mirror. Patting silently across the carpet, I took the tie from his hands. Rising on my toes, I closed the space between us to half an inch and started knotting it for him. My index finger brushed his Elias's apple, feeling it bobs sharply under his steady breath.
No lipstick today. No perfume either, in case fragrance bothers you. So tell me, Mr. Elias, are you allergic to a woman's natural scent? Your wife favors floral perfumes. Which smells better, hers or mine?
You are an employee. She's my wife.
He stepped back, bolt and clean, and told me to pick up the invitation off his desk. Midnight Manhattan is a den of decadence. I followed Elias into a private room. Inside, the game played out in silence, card tables, low glasses, deals moving under the surface. I accidentally knocked over his coffee when stepping back deliberately. Scalding liquid raised a row of furious red lines across my hand. Elias calmly told the waiter to bring ice and ointment and turned right back to the max acquisition schemes at the table. Not a flicker of warmth in my direction. His near divine self-control made him harder to crack than ever. He let me close. He held the line. It was the cruelest possible version of cat and mouse. I went to the restroom and ran cold water over my fingers, trying to shut down the burn. In the steamy mirror, the small mole at the corner of my eye looked stranded, but just as I reached for the door, a brutal hand came out of the shadow and clamped down on my shoulder. Chris, an old enemy from 2 years ago, a family apart with my own hands. The world spun as I was slammed against the cold stall wall, skull cracking against tile, dizziness flooding in. Chris sneered, yanking my hair to force me onto my knees on the filthy floor, so I had to look up at him. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted an invitation in his pocket, gold embossed, identical to the one on Elias's desk. Chris dragged me out in front of Elias and blew the cover. The whole hunt collapsed instantly. Neither of us noticed the steady click of Elias's leather shoes approaching. Outside, Chris's grip was terrifying. The slap rang my ears like a struck bell. My left cheek went from dull throb to burning heat in seconds, and the rusty, metallic taste of blood spread under my tongue. To save myself, I told him Elias's wife was now my patron and my current employer. Revenge would be easy, but risking the wrath of two titans wasn't. Men like Chris understand leverage. His face went livid as he released me. 5 minutes later, I'd smoothed my hair, swallowed the panic out of my eyes, and walked back into the suite like nothing had happened. Elias was absorbed in his Texas Hold'em hand, long fingers tapping rhythmically on the table, ignoring my return. Holding my breath, I approached and replaced his drink with fresh champagne. Chris came in behind me and sat on the sofa across from us, his sinister gaze darting between Elias and me.
Missing a queen, Chris? Seb says you've been on a hot streak. Let's play a real hand. Full house. Even when you kick a dog, you check the owner first. Chris, you should know the rules.
Was he defending me? Color drained from Chris's face, setting into a corpse-like pallor. He'd lost not just hundreds of thousands at the table, but the fragile dignity he'd built in front of Elias. Dead silent, reclaimed the room again. I picked up the lighter to light Elias's cigarette. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. The little blue flame trembled in the air, missing the tip of the cigarette over and over. A large, calloused hand suddenly closed around my wrist. Rough, steady, undeniable. The force of it went straight through my skin into the bone. Elias took a long pull on the cigarette without letting go. Through the smoke, his eyes black as a frozen lake held me in place. His fingers brushed against my swollen cheek.
Where were you? Who were you trying to seduce?
Manhattan. In winter, the air is sharp as a blade, and tonight it dragged across the swollen side of my face and lit it up in waves of burning pain in the underground garage. The Bentley was already running. Just as I reached for the door handle, he muttered without turning his head, "Get in." I gripped the handle until my knuckles whitened. The window rolled halfway down. Elias was staring straight ahead, his jaw drawn tight as a pulled bow under the flickering lights of the garage. The wall he put up was unmistakable. He was reassessing my risk level.
I don't get involved in my employee lives.
But I don't want you to misread me.
I brushed my hair back deliberately, so the swollen side of my face was on display. He finally turned his head. The abyssal eyes worked over me in the shadow of the back seat, peeling each layer off my story, shifting into professional victim mode, tears pooling perfectly in my eyes. I spun a lie about Chris's attempted assault.
Done acting? You're still not being straight with me. You tried seducing Chris before. It didn't take. So you switched targets.
Ice flooded my veins, then realization struck. This misunderstanding was perfect. Better he sees me as a vengeful gold digger than a professional hunter. Leaning into the narrative, I sobbed out a tragic tale of harassment, forcing me to seek refuge at MI. Between sobs, I studied his face. He leaned back, opened his laptop to answer emails, his detached calm leaving me utterly blind to his next move. The car pulled up to my building. I got out in a daze. Behind me, the rear window rolled down. Something landed lightly in the snow. At my feet, his handkerchief. Elias, is this pity or desire? Saturday morning, Manhattan was buried under the worst blizzard in years. I came up out of sleep, pushed the window open, and saw a black Bentley sitting at the end of the block, Elias's car, framed by snow and early sun. He was in a silver gray cashmere coat, his silhouette drawn out long and clean, not quite of this world. My pulse jumped, teeth barely brushed. I grabbed my coat and bolted downstairs, leaning against the car, a cigarette burning between his fingers. His signature cool cedar scent cut through the storm. I ran up breathless. The biting cold sharpened my mind. Snowflakes clung to his brow as he explained the emergency trip he'd come directly when he couldn't reach me. Realizing my phone was dead, I tugged his hem like a scolded child, eyes drifting mischievously to the ember at his fingertips.
Let me have a drag. I'm exhausted.
I boldly took the half-smoked cigarette without waiting for permission. I don't actually smoke. I let the nicotine tangle with the mint of my toothpaste in my mouth and then blew a long, slow plume of smoke up into his cold, pale face. I went up on tiptoe and pushed the last of the smoke from under my tongue between his parted, surprised lips and sealed it there. The wind and the snow howled around us. Behind him was the cold metal of the car. In front of him was me, warm, pressed close, asking for it. He couldn't step back. He didn't push me away. His fingertips moved along the side of my face and with absurd restraint flicked one snowflake off my eyelash. It was the first time he'd touched me on his own. The calluses at the base of his fingers, through that cool air, sent something all the way down to the bone. A few hours later, I hid in a corner of the airport lounge and called Serafina back. She told me that even though Elias had come home the night before, he'd sat in the study until dawn. This man's self-control over one bordered on something pathological. He'd rather sit alone all night in the cage called marriage than leave so much as a fingerprint of infidelity on the record. I kept my voice low, glancing across the lounge at Elias, who was flipping through a magazine with the calm of a priest. He sat there like a man no hand could touch, and I was about to use mine to shatter the gold leaf off him somewhere far from this. The plane landed in Philadelphia. The business trip was for max acquisition battle between Elias and Seb. Seeing my client's uncle in the boardroom still rattled me. To get my own plan moving, I faked a stomach cramp, excused myself early. Afternoon sun came through the spa's skyline. Seb's laughter came from far to near. I felt like I was about to suffocate. My long hair spread uncontrollably underwater, a few strands drifting out from the edge of Elias's bathrobe, floating on the milky white surface.
Seems I haven't come at the right time. Are you acting like such a stranger to me? Why not bring her up and introduce her to me?
Elias walked straight at him, perfectly composed. Seb didn't push. He stayed maybe 30 seconds and left. The second they were gone, I broke the surface, grabbed the marble lip of the pool, and gasped. Warm milk dripped from my hair. My skin was flush pink from the heat. I was furious. If that old fox hadn't walked in, just as I was about to leave, the door moved again. Seb was back. He walked past me, his eyes sweeping over the milky water, like he was looking for evidence of a stain. Then he turned and looked down at me. There was that playful, knife-edge glint in his eye. He'd already worked out exactly what I was, the bait that had Elias actually slipping for once. I held his look. I knew what he was hunting for. I gathered my wet hair, the heavy sweetness of milk still on my skin, and walked straight past him out toward the hotel suite. I pushed the suite door open. The room was thick with nicotine and cold cedar. Elias was on a video call, wearing wire-rim reading glasses, his back to the sunset. The blue screen light hit his pale, almost translucent profile. He looked unnervingly calm. I set a black coffee, exactly 1 milligram of sugar, the way he took it, on the desk beside him. My fingertips traced the edge of the wood. Just as I started to turn away, he hit pause on the call.
The red mark on your chest is beautiful.
So somewhere in the chaos of that game, underwater, he'd noticed the small private mark. I never showed anyone. He keyed off the meeting and shut the laptop. I crossed back and knelt between his knees. I took his big, callous hand into mine. Slowly, I drew the rough pad of his fingers down the side of my throat, inch by inch, until his palm was pressed flat against the...
They used to say the vein in this finger runs straight to the heart, Mr. Elias. You can lie to a marriage, you can lie to Serafina, but you can't lie to your own blood. I think I've fallen for a married man.
The phone on the side table rang at exactly the wrong moment. I stood up gracefully and gave him space. Elias took the call, kept it short, and hung up. Get ready, he said. There's a benefit tonight. The very top of the social food chain, every smile a chip on a table. I stayed at Elias's side and watched him knock back hard liquor, glass after glass. That permanently composed face of his finally cracked just at the edges. There was something quietly broken about him when he drank. I leaned into his ear, soft breath warm on his neck, and slurred just tipsy enough that I had a habit of sleeping naked. When I was drunk, he didn't answer. His finger ran the rim of the glass. His eyes were hopelessly clear. The whole vibe died the second I saw her. Julia, a mistress whose cover I'd personally torn off the year before. I'd cost her the upgrade. I'd made sure the wife humiliated her in public. Now, she was draped on the arm of some elderly tycoon, and her eyes locked onto me like a snake. There was enough hate burning off her to scorch holes in her evening gown. In my line of work, having your identity exposed is suicide. I quickly told Elias I was getting cramps and excused myself toward the restroom, trying to get the hell out of the danger zone. Julia followed me out into the hallway like a shadow. She hissed Millennium Vixen at me, the nickname I worked under and started in, mocking whatever innocent role I was running tonight. I had no energy for her, but she lost it. She grabbed a metal fixture off the wall and swung at me. That came at me with her stiletto heel like a weapon. In the middle of the scuffle, Elias's voice, low, unmistakable, echoed at the far end of the hallway. My head cleared in a snap. I saw him coming. I knew a head-on confrontation with Julia in front of him was the end of everything. So I slapped myself twice, hard enough to leave clean finger marks, calibrated enough not to break skin. I slid down the wall onto the cold tile, let my hair fall across my face to hide the collation in my eyes, and let the sobs come on. I accused her, breaking, sniffling, of attacking me out of jealousy. Julia stared, frozen, as I transformed in front of her into a small beat thing curled on the floor. Elias stopped under the bright hallway light. His eyes were across the red prints rising on my face. Julia's men tried to wave it off as girls being girls. Elias just slowly loosened his tie. The air in the corridor dropped about 10 degrees. He didn't move his face often, but when a man like Elias chooses to take a side in public, it's the worst possible humiliation for everyone. On the other side of it, he didn't give Julia's man any ground. He had Julia slap herself and apologize. Julia bit her lip and slapped herself over and over. I smiled through wet eyes and my chest was ice, but the suspicion in Elias's gaze was still there, working over me, and that cold settled in my spine. He hadn't bought all of it. Back in the hotel suite, Elias killed the wall lamp and sank into the dark of the sofa. He pulled the tie loose. His voice came out lazy, but the pressure behind it could peel skin.
Pretty fierce. When it was your turn to fight.
I held his stare in that dead silent dark.
How many lies are you running on me about now?
My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to come up my throat. In front of this man, every second was a step on the edge of a... Elias sank deeper into the sofa. The ember of his cigarette flared and dimmed in the shadow. Cold cedar tangled with the leftover alcohol on his breath. I watched him weighing reply against silence.
Mr. Elias, you overestimate me. The cramp was real this time. I wasn't lying.
Do you know who Julia is?
3 steps from him, and my heart was a war drum. In the hunting grounds of Manhattan, a secret is both a survival chip and a slow poison. I couldn't admit I was the vixen who took apart mistresses for a living. I couldn't let him see the history between Julia and me. I took a breath, buried the edge in my eyes, slipped back into beaten and bruised mode, and told him quietly that Julia was a professional mistress.
Did she steal your man, or did you steal hers?
I don't do that. That's not who I am.
You don't steal other women's boyfriends. You only go after married men?
I knew exactly what he was talking about. Me. With him, I let my eyes go red right on cue, slid into the best mask I had, and told him, brokenly, that I wasn't chasing power. I just happened to fall for a man who happened to belong to someone else. The obsession that goes against your own conscience, that's the sharpest fuse you can slide under a disciplined man's defenses. Elias didn't move. Then, casually, he asked how many men I'd been with besides him. That kind of possessive question. The cold ran straight down my back. I gritted my teeth and said 1. He laughed. The laugh didn't touch his eyes. It felt less like amusement and more like a verdict being read after a long deliberation.
Millennium Vixen. The one who's so good at seducing married men. That's you, isn't it?
I looked up. My brain went white. He'd heard in the hallway. He'd heard. In the dark, his posture spread out wider, leaner, more dangerous. He was breathing hard enough that 2 buttons on his shirt had come open, and the hard line of his chest moved with each breath. The fire he kept locked inside the furnace of his restraint was finally up close to the bars, and it was the kind of sexy that could burn a building down. He crooked one finger. I bent down to him, like a believer who'd been called forward, trembling. His breath, nicotine warm, landed on the small mole at the corner of my eye.
Laufey, you're so good at seducing married men that even I almost actually fell for it.
Under Elias's bottomless stare, I felt my heart give a small terminal shudder.
So tell me, was Mr. Elias actually moved?
What do you think?
If you almost fell for it, that has to mean I'm something to you.
This mouth tells more lies than truths. Touching it is a high-risk move.
I've crawled through this battlefield called a hunt my entire career. I've never met an opponent this clear-eyed, this cold-blooded. I was almost ready to surrender when the door buzzer cracked through the room like a gunshot. It dragged me out of the dark. He'd been spinning around me, his secretary knocking, reminding him about the senior merger meeting. Elias stood up and chose a tie in front of the full-length mirror. He specifically asked me to do that complicated knot from the other day. And there was something in the way he asked that wanted to be obeyed. In the boardroom, Manhattan's financial heavyweights all had knives behind their smiles. Arthur, one of the subsidiary heads, was angling to use Seb's leverage to choke off Elias's expansion. They circled around to Serafina's father, trying to use the chain of marriage to wrestle this lion back into the cage he'd already broken out of. Elias just turned the fountain pen in his fingers, bored, untouchable, meeting wrapped, lights cut. It was just Elias and me, soaking in the cold blue glow of the screens. He was alone at the head of the long table. There was a single sheet of paper in his hand, anonymous letter.
Laufey, 26, professional con artist, operates under the name Millennium Vixen, has moved through several of Manhattan's top social circles, 19 confirmed romantic targets on the books, men aged 30 to 50, all walked away ruined. If interested in a more thorough briefing, room 1203 at the hotel.
Julia, that crazy bitch. Cold sweat broke down my back. I watched Elias's face bone pale under the fluorescent light. He sat as still as the Dead Sea, but I could see clearly. There was a wave rising under the surface big enough to drown me. I held the innocent mask in place and tore the page to pieces right in front of him, tried to dress the whole thing up as woman-on-woman jealousy. Elias watched me, silent, for a long moment, asked nothing, got up and left the room.
Laufey, you've been smug too many years.
The kings of Wall Street hate getting played more than anything.
You think you can carve out a corner of that
Disciplined fortress of his and live there? Dream on.
Your number's up. End of the week.
My fingers tightened on the phone until they went white. In this steel forest had hunter and prey finally swapped place. Julia's burn it all ultimatum stuck in my throat like a fishhook. Couldn't spit it out. Couldn't swallow it. I knew the name Millennium Vixen was crawling out of the shadows and into broad daylight. Early next morning, the Philadelphia fog hadn't lifted. I arrived at the ranch lobby on time with the contract Elias had asked for. There was time. I used the front desk landline to call Serafina and try to quit. It was my last clean exit. My employer gave me the coldest possible threat in the softest possible voice. Laufey, you boarded this ship. Nobody walks off it mid-voyage. The only other way off is the bottom of Hudson. I was sealed in a dead end, woven out of money and lies. An hour later, I made it to the shooting range on schedule. The manager walked me back to lane 1, where Elias was. The second I pushed the soundproof glass open, the air hit me, gun smoke and cold cedar. Elias was at the center of the lane. His plain black shirt cut hard against him, outlining the explosive lines of his frame in a way that read almost cruel. His hair wasn't combed back today. The loose strands were damp with sweat, and for the first time I saw something feral in him he usually kept buried. I held my breath. He was shooting one-handed. He unhurriedly slid his left hand into his pocket. In that same second, his right hand pulled the trigger. Crack. The shot snapped out like a line of black lightning. At the exact second, his collar button popped free. The round punched the bullseye 30 meters down the lane. That kind of casual, lethal multitasking sent a chill through me. Seb had appeared on the viewing platform without my noticing. The tailored vest was off. He was just in a beige cashmere sweater that couldn't hide the build under it.
Miss Laffy, want to try? Shooting is something men were built for. Women need a good instructor.
I hesitated. Seb didn't wait for a yes. He was off the platform and behind me in 3 strides, his bulk and warmth closing around me. He locked me in his arms from the back. The thick male smell of him, leather, something animal soaked into every breath I took. His big hand wrapped around my shaking one and forced my grip onto the cold pistol. Bent close to my ear and asked, low first time, and his hot breath hit the side of my neck and ran a violent shiver down me. I forced out a yes. He gave a low, ambiguous laugh. His warm mouth brushed past my temple. Elias was a few feet away, loading rounds, expression dead flat, but the knuckles on his shooting hand had gone bone white.
Elias doesn't have the habit of being tender with a woman. I do. Lofi, if you're shopping for a serious patron, I'm a much better bet than he is.
In this Manhattan hunting ground built out of money, my name in the trade is Millennium Vixen. I should have been the coldest predator in this jungle. But Seb's whisper just sent a shiver down me I hadn't felt in years. For a second, I thought he knew about Serafina hiring me, about the corner I'd been backed into by my enemies. But his eyes, viper sharp, held only the appreciation a man gives a toy he likes. And the way his body had reacted behind me made the rest of it perfectly clear. He told me a man at his level needed bait at his level, that the long art of push and pull blew cheap physical seduction out of the water. Crack. His finger pulled the trigger and the pistol kicked hard in my grip. The recoil went numb up my whole left side. My ears rang. My breath was full of burnt powder. Seb's cool lips were almost in my hair, and all I felt was the damp cold of a snake coiled around me. Elias's voice, flat, cold cut the moment in half before it went any further. I scrambled out of Seb's arms like a startled bird and pulled off to the side. Elias was sitting in the shadow of the rest area, expressionless. Seb spoke into that heart-stopping silence and floated the actual proposal right in front of Elias. Elias handed me his assistant over to him. Seb laughed, big and loud. His eyes ran shameless tracks along the sweat-damp lines of my shirt. Elias didn't take the bait. He calmly unfolded the Max Group debt papers I'd brought in. While Seb thought he was holding the praised throat in his hand, Elias was already writing a $30 million check that bought the other party's loyalty outright. In this particular battle of Cannae, of money and leverage, Elias was the one who'd already pulled off the killing flank. In the company car on the way back, the partition was up and the space was suffocating. I stopped hiding the wildness in my eyes. I curled into Elias's lap, my damp hair brushing his tightly drawn brow. I could feel the heat under the cold shell of him. He was jealous and still using that high and mighty CEO logic to lecture me, telling me a player like Seb wasn't someone a girl like me could handle.
And what about you, Mr. Elias? Seb is the playboy who kisses my hair. You're the hypocrite who says one thing while quietly burning for me.
Take a car back to the hotel by myself. The whole afternoon, Elias was gone, off the map. The mortification of being yanked close and then thrown out the door washed over me in waves. Late in the hotel room that night, I stripped down and slid into a bathtub full of pale, soft white bubbles. The warm water lapped my back. I held my phone above me and worked the angle until the light did exactly what I wanted. Top down, warm orange light running down the soft line of my neck. My knees breaking the surface, flushed pink from the heat, the suggestive pink of a girl who'd been kneeling on a bed. I typed one line under the photo, tonight. I'm prettier than the moon. The 40 minutes after I hit send were torture. The water cooled, my fingertips wrinkled. Elias's reply never came. It was a stone dropped into the ocean. In this hunt, I started to wonder if I'd missed something somebody had pulled at.
Mr. Elias, did you get my message?
Yes.
Then, was it pretty?
Silence, then the cold click of the line going dead. I threw the phone into the comforter, chest moving hard. In the dead dark of that room, I could almost smell the cold cedar coming off him, turning into a pair of invisible hands. Friday evening. The airport lounge was smelled like pine and expensive leather. Manhattan's sunset was trying to cut through the glass wall, throwing Elias's long, lonely silhouette across the floor like a thrown knife. I dragged my carry-on behind him in heels, half a step inside that familiar wake of cold cedar.
Mr. Elias, did you sleep well last night? Did you see me in your dreams?
His stride didn't break by a millisecond. He kept his eyes ahead. His apple moved once above the buttoned collar of his shirt, cold, controlled, like he was swallowing down something he'd refused to want. I watched the Bentley's taillights vanish at the end of the block. I turned to flag a cab to M.I. Tower. Serafina was expecting the photos and video from the bathhouse. But as I walked into the underground garage of her building, something off caught my eye. A Land Rover in a back corner, headlights flickering on and off in the dark. I should have walked away, but the wind carried a sound out, muffled, breathy. I looked toward the windshield on instinct, and in that second, my whole read on this case collapsed. In the trembling rearview mirror, I saw Serafina, and on top of her, Arthur, the same executive who'd been gunning for Elias in the boardroom. I clamped a hand over my mouth, against my ribs, felt deafening in the quiet of the garage. In this melodrama, I'd been treating her as the wounded party. She was the butcher with the knife. Serafina wasn't protecting herself. She was working with her lover to use me as the lever, pry Elias out of Manhattan, and take the empire with him gone. This game was filthier than I'd known. Under this tower, nobody was clean. Next day, I walked into that high-pressure office like nothing had changed. Elias was reviewing the $30 million wire records from the Max deal. I stood beside him the way I always did, but this time, I was running the trick Seb had handed me. Accidentally, high-level seduction simmers. It doesn't grab. I stopped trying. I wore a strict, professional blouse, but I'd picked one with a dark gold button held by a single thread that came alive every time I drew breath. I straightened in his line of sight and let that button teeter on the edge.
You said you'd fallen for a married man. Is that man me?
I climbed up onto the corner of his desk, crawled body low and slow as a snake, until my chest brushed the back of his dry hand. I was about to close the trap with the sweetest possible lie when he laughed. Cold, a stack of photos hit the desk in front of me like thrown blades. Photos of me walking into elite parties, hot springs, hotels every time with a different man. 19 of them. The full ledger of my career as the Millennium Vixen, ironclad.
Lofi, did you really think you could pull this off in front of me?
Manhattan dawn cuts like a surgical blade. It comes through the floor to ceiling glass in clean rays, slicing the dead quiet of the office. I had my fists clenched, nails stuck deep enough into my palms that the pain was the only thing keeping me on this side of conscious. Elias sat there, fanning a stack of execution photos out across the desk, his voice as level as flat water. He laughed quietly that Serafina had picked upon with this much lethality. He admitted almost to himself that I'd nearly gotten him twice. I stared at him through that cold cedar haze, hunting for the smallest sliver of mercy. He exhaled a slow ring of smoke. His eyes darkened behind the gray of it. The first time was Philadelphia, shaking on the edge of giving up. That purple lace his frozen rationality had cracked just once along a hairline that wanted to be called longing. I'm the Millennium Vixen. I have drowned dozens of powerful men in their own desire. In front of this abyss called Elias, every move in my book had become a punchline. He extended one finger and tipped my chin up with the back of it. The rough drag of his fingertip burned bad enough that my whole soul felt like it was trembling.
Cheap charm is a gloat on the market. Real allure is rare. Coming after me, win or lose, was a mistake. Lose, and you walk away with nothing. Win, and it lasts an afternoon. The moment I sober up, I personally enjoy taking apart anyone who came at me dirty. Unless you're capable of making sure I never sober up.
I didn't conquer you.
That you're still standing next to me at all is already a miracle.
Mr. Elias, are you going to deal with me?
Why? Are you afraid?
I thought of Serafina and Arthur the Land Rover, the rearview mirror, the muffled breathing. I was sitting at the dead center of this couple's quiet war to strangle each other. That was my only remaining chip. The only thing I had left to surrender. I grabbed his sleeve like a drowning woman grabbing the only piece of driftwood. I told him I wanted to make it right. I wanted to atone. Elias lowered his head. In those bottomless eyes, my reflection rippled. He raised his hand slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His warm mouth brushed the wine-red drop at my earlobe. His breath came heavy across the small mole at the corner of my eye.
How do you plan to atone? Think carefully before you answer.
He straightened the lines of his sharp suit and turned to go. On reflex, I grabbed his cup. There was one thing I needed to know before I could put a price on my own atonement.
That day in the pool, could you genuinely not resist me? Or were you just letting me run my scheme to the end?
Did you actually think you could bring me down?
My heart lurched, and right behind the surge of humiliation came a flash of something else he'd allowed me to play out. Indulged me to the final line. I understood then that in this game called The Hunt, I'd lost half and won half. To stay alive, I'd have to climb onto the thicker, more dangerous of the two thighs at the table. My phone buzzed. I read the message, then pushed open the heavy oak doors of the conference room. His secretary was halfway through a low report on Seb's latest moves. I didn't hesitate. Like a quiet vine that knew exactly where it was going, I walked straight up to Elias and laid my cheek against his ear. I could feel the secretary's startled glance, and I ignored every other person in that room. When the secretary excused herself, I laid the cards on the table. I told him Serafina was sitting in a cafe right now, waiting for ironclad proof of his cheating. Elias gave a thin, cold laugh. The contempt in it for his wife's gambit made the air go thin.
Mr. Elias, plan A failed. She'll always come up with a B. Better to keep the crisis you've already mapped, me, than guard against the next one you can't see coming. I take both salaries. I block her plays for you, and while I'm at it, I watch her people.
You want to draw 2 paychecks? And you want me as your shield between you and every collector at your door?
You couldn't bear to see me end ugly, could you?
An hour later, I walked into the corner cafe on time. Serafina was sitting in the shade of the window, holding a slim rectangle between her fingers, my work ID. I dropped it in the garage the night before when I'd stumbled into her and Arthur. I forced my heartbeat down and ran a clumsy lie about a dead phone battery. Looked up at the woman across from me, and she wasn't the wounded wife anymore. She was a long game player who'd been sharpening the knife for years and was almost done. She warned me that if I didn't bring her something fatal soon, she'd be a worse problem for me than every enemy I already had. I walked out, the cold cut into my collar. As I turned the corner, I caught Arthur with his arm around Serafina, slipping out the cafe's side door. Her hand, gold-tipped nails and all, was inside his overcoat now, like the world had stopped existing around them. I pulled my phone out. My fingers shook as I tapped the shutter. I sat in the car and looked at this Manhattan jungle, soaked in want, and I lit a cigarette. Yes, I smoke. On that snowed-in morning, I'd played a girl who'd never even smelled nicotine just to feed Elias's almost pathologically traditional taste in women. Truthfully, catching Serafina's slips should have been easy for Elias on his own. He'd agreed to the atonement arrangement because he wanted my filthy hands doing the work his clean ones couldn't be seen doing. I drew in smoke and held it. I had to keep walking this wire as a double agent the second I stepped into my tower. Flashbulbs hit my face like a hailstorm. There was a problem with the southern real estate parcel from the Max acquisition. Something had gone wrong on site, and the way it had hit the press was the setup. Somebody had been building the gallows behind Elias's back for weeks. I pushed through the microphones being shoved at me and held his image steady with the best lines I had. On this board, Seb or Arthur had already made a move. His office door was half open. The quiet inside spread like water. Elias was leaning on the bar cart, white shirt sleeves rolled up over the cold metal of his watch. I crossed the room, set my phone in front of him, Serafina, Arthur, video, and stills undeniable. I leaned over the desk. The waistline of my skirt rode up, just a little. Pale skin moved in and out of the office light. His long fingertips slid across the screen. He watched Serafina being free with herself, their man's arms, and his face did not move, not a flicker. That kind of inhuman composure put another chill down my spine. He'd seen through this whole show a long time ago. I came around behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist, chin on his broad shoulder. I could feel this apple work under my fingertips, part sculpted, moving from how much he was holding down. The cold cedar of him mixed with the faint scent of my hair, it tangled in that small space between us. I told him Julia was forcing me out of New York, that now he was the only thing I had to lean on. He turned and pinned me hard against the edge of the desk. The pressure of him over me almost cracked something. He told me that he never did business that didn't pay. He wanted me as his sharpest blade to bait the trap, take out the obstacles standing between him and the cleaner version of his empire. I took a cigarette and put it between my lips, hooked him with the look decadent at the surface, innocent under it. Elias didn't answer. He just leaned in and lit my cigarette against my mouth. In the curl of smoke between us, I saw something catch fire in his eyes, out of control, big enough to take Manhattan down with. I parted my red lips and lifted the cigarette, still warm with my mouth, still wet at the filter, and held it to his. The quiet in the office was the kind that pressed on your chest. He looked at the damp end of the cigarette, then at my eyes, which held nothing but ambition and an invitation. He simply lit a new one off the tip of mine against my mouth, tapped the record button on my phone. I needed his most private breaths on tape. Serafina would want to eat. His secretary's interruption broke the moment before it tipped past saving. The story behind the construction site accident had cracked open sabotage of a fuse device. Elias's killing floor face was back inside a single breath. His fingertips smoothed the wrinkles I just pressed into his shirt. The pivot from want to violence was inhumanly fast. When the secretary reported how I'd handled the press downstairs quick mouth, smooth as glass, a cruel, almost charmed curve lifted at the corner of his mouth. Once the office was quiet again, I curled against him like a cat angling for a reward, my fingertip tracing the deep lifeline in his palm. He didn't answer. He just shrugged into his coat cold again and signaled that I was off the clock. I took the chance and wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, my cheek pressed against his back where I could feel the steady drum of his heart. In that second, I wasn't the professional con artist who worked under the name Millennium Vixen. I was the bait in this steel forest most desperate to be eaten. I hit send and pushed recording his breath, his pulse to Serafina, a token of loyalty. I pushed the heavy oak door of the office open. The hallway lights were cold and dizzy bright. Arthur was leaning against one of the cold marble pillars, blocking my path. His cologne was aggressive enough to ferment in the narrow corridor. He stepped in and hooked a strand of my loose hair around his cool finger. There was a vicious thoroughness in his eyes, like he'd already read me cover to cover.
They weren't kidding about the name. Millennium Vixen. Get me Elias's bid number on the merger, or every one of those masterpieces of yours from New York. Runs front page tomorrow.
I looked at him, and a small flicker of professional contempt moved across my face. My scalpel cuts rotten flesh out of marriage. I don't steal ledgers. I was about to refuse him in the coldest possible voice, and the oak door behind me slid open without a sound. Elias was standing in that cold hallway light, the tailored jacket still in his hand, the one I just wrinkled. He saw Arthur's hand on the bottom of my waist, and he saw, in the same way, something between us. The hallway light was hospital cold. Elias walked out of the office, and his suited silhouette cast a clean, isolated shadow across the gray marble. He met Arthur head-on. In that 1 second, the air went thick with the powder smell of two apex predators sizing each other up. Arthur's smile was wide and false. Elias gave back a polite curve of the mouth that didn't reach his eyes. I moved fast. As they were passing each other, I stepped out between them. I called his name, soft. My fingertips wound around his cuff like a small, clever snake. I could feel Arthur's eyes contract sharp behind me, but I went on like there was nobody else in the corridor, went up on my toes, and adjusted Elias's collar with quick, soft fingers. I told him in a wife's tone, "Don't drink so much tonight." As I pull my hand back, I let it rest just for half a second over the warm spot above his heart. The unfamiliar tenderness threw him a little, but he caught my look, read the suggestion in it, and silently let the show called We're Sleeping Together play. In the elevator, alone with him, I climbed up like an enchanted vine and pressed a slow wet kiss against the high bridge of his nose.
Is the acting real, Elias?
If you feel it's real, it's real.
Then the tires ground over snow and the Bentley pulled away. I stood at the curb, watching the taillights shrink down the block. Both Serafina and her secret lover had already smelled blood by now. Meanwhile, the construction site blowing up in the press had stripped the last of the mystery of the Millennium Vixen name. Old enemies looking for payback were starting to surface, one by one. I needed leverage, so I disappeared. Playing hard to get has always been my specialty. Next day, I was on the road, hood heavy. I deliberately killed every call from the secretary and let the fuse called worry burn in Elias's chest for a full 8 minutes. When the phone lit up with his name, I knew I'd won.
Elias.
So that's the play. Lie and run.
I didn't get the money.
I didn't get the man.
If I don't run,
Am I supposed to wait around?
For Mr. Elias to drop me in a hole?
Laufey, don't make me come find you.
But my fam stayed with me. Life told me nah, but I told life, hey, God.
The restaurant was a soft braid of perfume and ice clinking in glass. Sitting around that table with the sisters, the ones who actually moved the pieces. In this city's vanity circuit, I felt a kind of belonging I hadn't felt in a long time. When I first started, they told me about the rot and the smell underneath all of it. I didn't listen back then. I thought as long as I did the job right, the rest didn't matter. Now, I finally understood the wry mockery they carried in their voices. I'd believed I was the one moving pieces on the board. Turned out I was a pawn, trying not to get swept. The food was beautiful. I couldn't get a bite of it down. The suffocation pushed me up out of my seat and into the corridor. The hallway was long, deep, cold. I just wanted a quiet wall to lean on. But outside a private room at the corner, I caught a voice that put ice down my spine. Seb. The thick smell of cigar smoke seeped out around the door. I heard his slow chuckle, the arrogance of a man pulling all the strings, and one phrase floated through clearly enough to land detonator fuse. The explosion that had been wrecking Elias's week, that was Seb's knife in the back. I'd assumed even the most ruthless old cynic still cared about family somewhere. After all, this was the empire his own brother, Serafina's father, had built. Wrong. He was burning all of them, including me. My fingers shook, pulling the phone out. I framed the lens on the devil trading favors in the dark room. My heart was loud enough I could hear it in my own ears. Every second of recording felt like dancing across the blade of a scythe. I started to back away, and a heavy hand that smelled like sweat and something darker clamped down on my shoulder. I was dragged inside. In that smoke-choked silence, Seb was sipping coffee.
Laufey. Or should I say, Millennium Vixen?
He told me, casually, that he'd done his homework on me weeks ago. He picked up my phone and watched my own footage back. He knew exactly what I'd been doing, running a double game between Serafina and Elias. The polished face he wore in boardrooms had gone slack and ugly, the way a man's face goes when he stops fathering. He gave me a choice. Tonight, there was a private dinner where the man who held the lifeblood of this whole business war would be seated. I'd use my body, the famous unbeatable one, to handle him. Or Seb shredded my entire history right here, fed the evidence to Serafina, and I was at the bottom of the Hudson before the recording ever saw daylight. I didn't have a choice. An hour later, I was standing in front of a fitting mirror with Manhattan night burning behind me. The dress was a deep V, backless, red enough to look like it was bleeding. The silk pulled taut across me with the terror I couldn't sweat out. In the mirror, my eyes were cold and decadent, like a poisoned blade about to come out of its sheath. I pushed the door of the dining room open. Through the slick, oily sound of business class drinking and laughing, I clocked the prey at the head of the table, and across from him, Elias. Behind a cloud of cigar smoke, Seb's eyes were dim and ugly. With the polish of a pimp, he steered me toward Max, the man whose signature was the lifeblood of this whole war, whose eyes were already crawling all over me. The air in the private room was thick and dirty, soaked in the most hypocritical version of high society that money could buy. I kept my eyes locked on the ice sculpture seated directly across from me. Elias was dressed too formally tonight. The cold coming off his bones was wildly out of place in a room full of carnal desire. I hated his clinical watching. I hated even more the godlike restraint he managed to hold on to every single time. If I'm gonna fall, I'm dragging this Buddha down to hell with me. Pretending to raise my glass to him, I traced an ambiguous, deep line down the rough center of his palm with my fingertip. In that beat, the permanent dark behind his eyes broke open completely. Without warning, he stood up like a predator that had been baited 1 second too long. Before Max could even register, Elias's hand had closed on my wrist like a steel vise and was hauling me out of that nauseating little circle. He pulled me with him like I was his tainted prize and slammed me down into the back seat of the Bentley. Reeking of someone else's drink, I tumbled into his arms, my hands locked around the back of his neck, looking for rescue. Or maybe enacting an execution. He hadn't just slept with me. He'd used those eyes that saw too much to lock every exit in the room. He didn't stay the night. He sat in the dark of the living room, putting on that crisp white shirt with no urgency, reknotted the tie that had been around my wrists. The transformation was clean. Wall Street's quiet king, again, the kind who moves whole companies with a phone call. Manhattan in the morning. Outside the windshield, the fog hung thick and gray. I drove one-handed. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. I had it bad for the way that disciplined man took me apart. It was the kind of addiction you couldn't quit. Every step of how he came into me carried something tender enough to burn the building down. I parked next to the cafe and sat in the lot, staring at the screen, at the evidence that could pull the god of Wall Street straight off his pedestal. In the footage, Elias's eyes burned with a wildfire he never showed in public. Inside the cafe, the heat was on full. It couldn't touch the chill in me. Serafina sat across from me, fingertips drumming against the wood, her eyes greedy and impatient.
I want the full payment for this job, and I want a clean one-way ticket out of the country. The evidence is in my hand. The minute the money hits, his throat is yours. After that, I never want to hear from any of you again.
I watched the wild gleam catch in Serafina's eyes, the ugly glee of a conspirator who can finally see the finish line. I wanted to run from this filthy transaction, set my soul on fire, but before the words even settled, the cafe door chimed, a wave of cold air came in, and with it, the scent I would have known anywhere. That mint and cedar burn flooded the whole room. I froze in place. I didn't dare turn around. The reflection of the front window. I watched a black cashmere coat coming toward us, one slow step at a time. Elias stopped directly behind me. His eyes were the eyes of something out of hell. He bent down a few inches and let his rough fingers trace the line of my spine through the wool of my coat. Even through the layers, I could feel the wild, possessive want coming off him.
A one-way ticket. Is my personal assistant trying to skip town?
My fingertips spasmed on the table, the kind of terror that climbs out from under your nails. I shoved the photos, the ones with last night's mess on them, into my bag, my hands as clumsy as a thief in their first week. When I looked up, I crashed straight into the frozen black of Elias's eyes. He stood with the light at his back, the cold mist still clinging to that black cashmere. His gaze paused just a half second on the last photo that had slid out to the corner of the table, the blurred shape of us. Last night on a bed, but Elias laughed. He pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down like he'd been invited. Every movement as composed as if he were arriving at a charity gala. His long fingers laced together. The faint blue veins on the backs of his hands looked like snakes in winter under the bright cafe light. He even thoughtfully refilled Serafina's coffee halfway, then told me gently that wanting time off to see his wife wouldn't work. I had to go through him instead. A clean, undisguised threat. This couple, each one quietly twisting a knife behind their backs, sat across from each other like Manhattan's most picture-perfect power marriage, making small talk about the morning financial news. I sat between them. The red marks the tie had left on my arm pulsed under the cuff of my blouse. The aggression he'd left in my body was screaming under the polite breakfast conversation. When it was time to go, Elias stood without warning. His big calloused hand closed around my wrist as if it had every right to. The grip was hard enough to crush bone. I watched the mask on Serafina's face slit open in real time. The eyes she'd lined in gold dust, burned with something poisonous. But in front of the room, all she could do was watch as the man she personally aimed at me walked me out of the cafe. In the sealed cabin of the Bentley, the partition went up. The space shrank down to the size of an interrogation room. The wild, possessive want in Elias wasn't hidden anymore. He snatched my phone and dragged one cruel swipe across the screen. The silence in the car tore in half. A minute later, he pulled me out of the car. We were at one of Manhattan's most exclusive and most filthy clubs. Elias sat in the shadowed booth of the VIP section, half his face hidden behind drifting smoke. He told me to get up on the floor and entertain those fat, greasy guests already drooling at the line of my dress. I was an item with a price tag. I turned and swayed under the cold knife of the spotlight. The looks from the crowd were sticky, ugly, like dozens of snakes crawling across my shaking back. Elias stayed back behind the burning end of his cigarette, one after another. Those eyes, frozen, lake deep, tracked every inch of me that trembled from the humiliation. The crystal tumbler shattered in Elias's hand. He came through the crowd like a lion that had just decided to bleed someone, ignoring the gasps around him, his hand around my wrist like a vice. He dragged me out of that dirty room. Pressure coming off him, mixed with the night air, made it impossible to keep up with him. Back at my apartment, Manhattan neon was already trying to push in through the seams in the curtains. Elias stood at the entryway, casually undoing the smoke-scented buttons of that black cashmere coat. The hunger in his eyes hadn't been spent. It carried a different kind of weight, now proprietary. He was planning to stay the night again, in the bed that had watched us fall once already. It was his quiet way of telling me what I was to him now, and it was the deepest contempt he could possibly show my soul. As if last night's surrender could be re-upped on his schedule indefinitely. He was going to keep me as his gilded songbird. I was sure of it. I looked at him. My heart was tearing in two between complete surrender and absolute clear-eyed sobriety. I raised my hand, let my fingertips brush the rough of his stubble, and under the suffocating pressure of him, I let every word out of my mouth come out as a thin poison needle pushed cleanly.
Mr. Elias, there are rules in this trade. I'm a con artist. Fine, but I have one rule I don't break. I don't sleep with married men.
Through that polished gentleman's skin. Cold white screen light sliced the dim around us. Serafina's name flashed in the dark, pulsing like a silent slap. Elias's body went still for one beat. Then he snapped back into place, clean, mechanical, the way a precision part clicks back into its slot. I took the crack reason and ran. I grabbed my bag and stumbled out the apartment door like I was fleeing a fire that could burn the soul off me. Downstairs, at 2 a.m, the cold wind cut at my cheek like a thin knife. Before my heart had even steadied, I saw a familiar figure waiting in the shadow at the curb. Seb was leaning against his car door, an expensive Cuban burning between his fingers. The ember glowed and dimmed in the dark like an eye watching prey. He smiled, calm, polished, false. He handed me a beautifully wrapped apology gift and a heavy gold embossed invitation.
Miss Laufey, tomorrow night's party. Max and I would both very much like
to see you there, as my date, of course.
His hand, luxury watch flashing, rubbed against my fingertips in a way that wasn't accidental. This wasn't an apology. This was an ultimatum. In his power war with Elias, he wanted me to pick a side publicly. Either keep being Elias's quiet private possession or become the blade Seb used to put in Elias's back. I looked at the gold invitation, every feeling buried under a flat, professional mask. I accepted his poisoned gift elegantly. A small, cold curl rose at the corner of my mouth, the professional kind. After Seb drove off, I pushed open my apartment door, exhausted. I had braced for it falling back into that abyss, cold gaze, getting pinned to the hallway wall again, under that cedar and mint pressure. What met me instead was a suffocating silence. I stumbled into the master bedroom, my fingertips, shaking, brushed the rumpled sheets. Elias had left clean, decisive, the way the sharpest businessman leaves a table after an exchange of equal value, with precise, no scent of tenderness left behind. The faint crease in the bed mocked the importance I had attached to last night. The next day, I put on my sharpest, coldest pieces a black trench coat suit, armor. I slid Sep's gold embossed invitation into my bag and held onto it like a knife that could turn on me at any moment. That evening, the lighting in the top-tier Manhattan club was dim and suggestive. Max's laugh sounded like a layer of unwashed grease sliding through the air. His fat hand, that vulgar gold watch on it, rubbed slowly around the rim of his wineglass. His eyes were full of the kind of greed that made my skin crawl. Beside him, Sep sipped a deep burgundy without hurry. A signet ring on his finger old, faintly blood-stained jade caught the candlelight in cold flickers. I watched these two ladder each other and circle each other like two animals about to share a carcass. When Max's date stepped away from the table, my peripheral vision caught it, a sensitive attachment half hidden under his briefcase. I bent down to retrieve my bag and used the cover of the motion to read what I could. It was the final settlement document for the Max Group merger. And on the signature line at the bottom, Seb's and Max's name sat side by side. So this wasn't a one-off play against Elias. It was a long game trap with layers. The attachment said it plainly. Max Group's bankruptcy was bait. The bait was meant to drag Elias into a merger that looked like a clean win and use MI, overseas cash flow, as a lever to gut every defense Elias had built on Wall Street in the last 3 years. The drinks night a few days back, a small move. Its real point had probably been to measure exactly how much I was worth to Elias. My breathing stopped. Every drop of blood in me went to ice. The winter wind outside was a dull blade. It cut the cold straight into the marrow, even through my trench coat. I curled into the back seat of the cab and pressed my fingers hard into the warm phone in my pocket. Earlier, under the cover of the velvet tablecloth, I dropped my eyes and hit record without looking. That recording was my ticket out of this meat grinder. It was the last rope I had. I didn't hesitate. I dialed Arthur. In the corner of a pub, so dim a shadow couldn't catch on the walls, I looked across at this man whose face wore his greed openly. And without breaking my expression, I dropped a bait that would crack him. I can get you Elias's private seal. I saw the flash of ecstasy go off behind his eyes, the look a beast wears when it smells carrion. I knew right then that this snake who fancied himself the smartest man in any room had walked into the trap I'd quietly built in reverse. Early morning, I came back to the apartment. The second I pushed the door open, that cold, almost lethal scent of tobacco filled my lungs. The hallway sensor light didn't kick on. The room was dead silent except for a strip of moonlight against the floor-to-ceiling glass that turned the whole apartment into a silver tomb. In the dark, a small orange ember was pulsing on the leather sofa. Elias was sitting there, long legs crossed, the black suit blurring his outline into shadow. Only that aggressive pressure of him, mint and cold cedar, was pushing toward me like a slow wave. Through the drifting smoke, those frozen lake eyes cut across the dark and locked onto me. He crushed the cigarette out and stood up. Every step he took landed on my spine and traveled through the rest of me. He reached out a big calloused hand and traced my fear-tight lip line with the back of his finger. Punishment and suggestion in the same motion until his fingertip settled hard against the trembling mole at the corner of my eye.
Who did you see? And whose life is in your hand right now?
In that suffocating cloud of mint and cold cedar, I finally understood I had fallen all the way, not just this body, which he'd already taken apart and put back together. Even the head I'd always kept clear had sunk slowly and without my noticing into this high-stakes table called surrender. The cardinal sin at any table is the reckless bet. So I made mine. I picked the biggest dealer in the room and went all in.
Mr. Elias, if you want my life, fine. It's yours.
In exchange for a clean exit, I told him everything. Sep's Kletchu got MI through overseas cash flow. Max's greedy hand on the betrayal. The trap I'd built around Arthur with the bait of the private seal. It was every piece of honesty I had. The only loyalty I could pledge in a meat grinder like this. When I was done, something shifted in the dark of Elias's eyes, the cold thinning out, the look softening into something playful enough to drown in. He bent down, ran the cool of his fingertip along the mole at the corner of my eye like a reward.
Next time, when I'm no longer a married man, I'll stay the night.
Then, all at once, Manhattan rolled into its loudest Christmas. Times Square was a hallucination of neon lighting the city up like a tomb that never slept. I was sitting at the window of a restaurant with a few of my sisters, the ones who'd also gotten trapped in this glittering world, watching crowds and snow move past the glass. In the gap between glasses being set down, the call I'd been waiting for came in, the one that stopped my heart. I gave him the name of the restaurant. I could hear my heart pounding through every word. 10 minutes later, I pushed the revolving door open and stepped into the Manhattan cold that cuts to the bone. The crowd was a moving tapestry. 1,000 lit windows above us turned into a hollow backdrop. And then, where the light started to thin out, a tall, slim figure in a black cashmere coat. Elias was walking toward me through a cheering Christmas crowd. The familiar cold pride was still in the line of his brow, but the second his eyes found mine, I caught a warmth I hadn't seen on him, the warmth a regular person carries, enough to thaw out every cold corner of this city. I grew up in New York. I had never known the city was this big block after block of indifference and calculation running all the way from one end to the other. And I had never known New York could be this small enough that the world and the noise of people fell away to nothing. And the only living thing in the ruins was this man walking toward me. Today, as it happened, was the last day of the 3-month deadline I'd given myself the day I took this job.